I am Denny Mwaura, Gallery 400's public programs manager. And I thank you all for joining us this afternoon to hear our speakers tonight, D'Angelo Lovell Williams and Derrick Woods-Morrow, as they discuss their photographic practice as it pertains to notions of queerness, kinship structures, Blackness, and performance. Before we start, I'd like to call into relation to the land many of us are on today, the broader city of Chicago, named after the Algonquin name for the river whose shores were lined with wild leeks, was and continues to be an indigenous place. Owing to the multiple waterways that converge here, Chicago is the ancestral home of the Three Fires Confederacy, consisting of the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, in addition to Miami, Illinois, Inuka, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee nations. Today, Chicago has the third largest urban Native population in the United States, with more than 65,000 Native Americans in the greater metropolitan area. The American Indian Center in Albany Park, founded in 1953, in the era of relocation, remains to be the oldest urban Indian center in the country. I hope to not merely acknowledge the land we are upon as a performative gesture, but also invite us to call into relation these lands, histories, and nations. They've not ceased to exist. We also acknowledge the significant work Gallery 400 and UIC has yet to do in honoring these relations and rectifying this colonial present with other struggles. These Americas are built on violence and erasure, and we bring these histories with us, those native to this land, indigenous people from other territories, as well as white settlers by conquest, and those of us who've come here by force or otherwise, as a result of slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and ongoing wars. When we enter any room, even or especially virtual rooms, we must bring these histories into view. And with this knowledge, we enter, we meet here in hopes of making a different world. I encourage you all to please check out Enrich Chicago's list of Indigenous-led land back and reparations projects, which you can find in the chat. Before I introduce our speakers this evening, I'd like to highlight our exhibition, Young, Gifted, and Black, the Lumpkin Bukutsi Family Collection of Contemporary Art, which is on view until December 11th. Our last two public programs include the writer Essence McDowell and archivist Skylar Hearn on November 18th, and the two will discuss Lorraine Hansberry's legacy in their research, documentation, and preservation of Chicago's Black communities. And on December 2nd, we have exhibiting artist Samuel Levi Jones, who will be joined by Chicago-based critic Camille Bacon. And the two of them will be in a conversation on the various facets of Jones's practice that include the deconstruction of medical text and athletic materials like football skins and tackling pads to create abstract works. Additionally, our last Voices lecture presenter is Beatriz Santiago Munoz, who will talk about the idea of translation from text to image, French to Creole, Puerto Rico to Haiti, land to ocean, and from one idea of Caribbean to another on November 2nd. So please visit our website to register for these insightful discussions. And about our speakers tonight, D'Angelo Lovell Williams is a Black HIV-positive artist expanding narratives of Black and queer intimacy through photography. They earned their BFA in photography from Memphis College of Art in 2015, an MFA in photography from Syracuse University in 2018, and are a 2018 Skowhegan School of Art alum. They live and work in New York City. D'Angelo Lovell Williams has had 4 solo exhibitions with Higher Pictures in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. The 2020 exhibition, Papa Don't Preach, was presented in collaboration with Janice Guy at her gallery in Harlem. Derrick Woods-Morrow, born in 1990, centers process-oriented collaborative projects with queer Black folks across a wide variety of media. His work has been exhibited in collaboration with Paul Mpagi Sepuya in the Whitney Biennial in 2019, in Photography Now, The Searchers at the Center for Photography at Woodstock, and in thematic international and national group exhibitions at Kunsthal KADE in the Netherlands, the Schulz Museum in Berlin, the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, and the Smart Museum in Chicago. Woods-Morrow is a member of the Chicago-based collective Concerned Black Image Makers and serves on the board of directors of the Fire Island Artist Residency. His work has been written about in the New York Times, W Magazine, Art Forum, ArtNet, the Chicago Tribune, New City, Hyperallergic, Visual Art Source, Art Papers, Art Daily, and Spot Magazine. Originally from Greensboro, North Carolina, he splits his time between Chicago and Rhode Island. Join me in welcoming them with a warm round of applause. All right. First of all, I would like to thank D'Angelo and Derrick for being here today. I'd like to start our discussion today with a quote by the performance scholar Stephanie Lee Batiste. And before that, let me start our presentation. Oh, give me a second here. All right, wonderful. I'd love to start with this quote that could frame our conversation today. And Stephanie Lee Batiste is a performance, as a scholar in performance. And she says, performance provokes much in the space of the unspoken and unspeakable. It offers an effective play with and playing upon. It relies on kinetic and symbolic shifts in the mind and muscle, bone and skin, breath and sound. It plays in a layered relationship with the capacity of Blackness to be about itself and about things beyond itself. Blackness too provokes beyond its intentionality. It performs. Black performance produces an aesthetic and experiential space of possibility between ideas and between people. An expressive production that provokes process, performance allows us to imagine collectivity. It shapes an engagement. So I'd love to start by Derrick and D'Angelo discussing the topic of authorship in photography. So how do you work with your subjects in the ways that they perform and pose for an image? And this question is directly to D'Angelo. We'll start with you, D'Angelo.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I work a few different ways as far as posing, sitters for images. I like to, just over the years, just like, having ideas and then gathering thoughts and like trying to put them visually or transfer them visually. I have started to make sketches for like ideas of gestures or pose, which basically revolve around acts of intimacy. And sometimes those are, they even include like ideas from, like what sex looks like from, like an out-of-body experience. So like, bodies can be intertwined and all of these things, but, doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, penetrative in certain ways, but like the look of what it is there. So sometimes I have like this range of, like, I guess, what would I call them? Actions that, look like they could be really intimate when they're just, mundane, like a touch here or there, but it could be through another body part. So like once I started including other queer Black men in the work with me, when it was just myself before, it was like, what do I have other people do images with me? And that led to, like, what do I do with the people around me when it's, just a friend or, a lover or, it becomes this like, I guess, catalog of things for me to go to and reflect, into an image and like see it reflected back at me, I guess. But it's helped to do that. But I could make any um, any of these ideas can happen anywhere. Many of my images are in domestic spaces, living rooms, kitchens, bedrooms, and others are in the landscape, which can be a little more challenging just depending on what's there. So I it I've learned to kind of like wing my way through like photographing in this field of nothing, if that's what it is. But it becomes more of a challenge to see like what can I create in space, um, kind of like having a studio outdoors. But yeah, so like a lot of my gestures and positioning of people in the images also depends on what people are comfortable with doing in the images, and I only want to do what people are comfortable with doing. Of course, you know, some people see my work and ask, you know, to be photographed, and other people I only photograph that I know, and that has involved family and certain things that I, you know, have done with other queer and trans and non-binary people doesn't quite happen the same way if family is involved. And then it turns into another gesture, another, you know, type of touch when that already exists with the main people that I have photographed who aren't necessarily given family but chosen. Um, but it's also, you know, like I look for what's natural, nothing forced, so that also kind of makes it easier for anyone involved to participate or want to. But other people, you know, are just like, yeah, I want to be photographed nude, and they're okay with that. I don't always need to do that, but it helps in sort of this ownership of a person's own body that they're willing to, you know, let be present and presented. Um, so yeah, I think it's like a few different ways that that works for me, and I'm always just thinking of other ways of, you know, like I'm always thinking about who I'm photographing and who I'm wanting to photograph, and that also determines like what we do and what the people are comfortable with doing.
Yeah, and speaking of whom you're photographing, we're looking at an image of you and your mother, and you are tethered to each other by a red string. Could you talk to us a little bit more about this image? Because it makes me think about um, something Roland Barthes talks about in his book, Camera Lucida. He thinks about this image as he thinks about his mother's photograph as some kind of umbilical cord that attaches him to his mother in a very visceral way. Could you tell us more about this image?
Yeah, I was thinking, well, one, I've just, since coming out, since my mother's seen my work, since family have become involved in my work, um, I've just been wanting to be more open as I can with ideas of how I'm wanting to include them in the work. And some of the first ideas that I had of images to make with my mother involved this idea of, you know, like knowing I came from this woman and don't remembering and not remembering like the sort of experience itself. So trying to recreate, you know, that experience as an adult. Um, and I was thinking about these visceral ways to do that, and I decided to have this string of gum coming from her mouth to mine. Um, but in doing that action, we both had to be like on the same page as far as like, you know, positioning, and we tried a few different ways. But yeah, like I'm also wanting to, you know, present my mother as, you know, she would want, she'd be okay with. Like just, she's someone that I've been inspired by, like her sense of beauty and art just growing up. And I mean, I could say she kind of contributed to my desire to be an artist, but yeah, like Also, as someone that know I've gotten a lot of my aesthetics from, just sometimes how I style myself, how I style other people in the images. So to be at this point where, it's not about styling, it's not about trying to look great, which was like a lot of what I was trying to figure out in grad school, just like presentation of the Black body and like, wanting to look beautiful and still, show this sort of, what's the word? This vulnerability of, like, yeah, nothing, no one is perfect. Um, but also just like keeping in mind that this is also about mother and son. This is also about a mother and her Black queer child living with HIV. And I mean, like all of that it wasn't about all of that at that time, but like, I was diagnosed maybe a year after this image was made. Um, and it's like, it's become a part of the conversation. And it's also become a part of, my family's inclusion in my life that it's just still slow moving, but can start conversations that we just haven't had between each other. Um, so like that was really helpful, and then including my mom and other family members in the work, just to talk about all of these different um, actions that we as Black people go through daily, and then never really talk about or discuss in certain ways. So yeah.
With Derrick, I'd love to hear about your engagement with photography, especially with the image that we're looking at to the left, which speaks directly to the history of photography and the way that photography has catered to white people and also white skin. So here you're thinking about photography's materiality, especially when it comes to film as a material, and also the concept of the index. Could you talk to us about this work and its conception?
First, I'm like, how do you follow up D'Angelo talking? Like, this put me in a spot. Thank you for having me too. Thanks. Yeah, very excited to be here and talk about the work, and also just be in conversation with D'Angelo, because like sometimes we just talk on the phone for an hour. So this feels nice. I'm thinking about this work maybe away a little bit from other work that I have created, which now seeks to sort of center co-performance in my relationship to other Black queer folks. And we may be in photographs together, or I may be photographing them, but in a way that's not so specifically talking about objects or the way that they perform. It's a sort of way of resting with queer kinfolk, a way of building community, and a way of spending time together. And I had to get to that point because when I first started making photography, I was very much confronted with the history of how white the medium was. And I had to think about like what I wanted to do and with my image, which is also, in conflict with that history. And so I was really just thinking about the history of photography, like the medium, the mechanism, even down to the science. Like the science was racist, that like the Shirley cards were these cards that were exposed based off of this white woman named Shirley. And that was the standard for Kodak film until like the mid 80s. And so it felt like I needed to talk about it. I was dealing with sort of the objectification of my own body. I'd come to Chicago, I'd open social media apps. And I'd get messages from men. Like the second I got to Chicago, that was like, come rape me, come tear me to pieces. You get the BBC comments, you get all of those things, right? And I began thinking, is it the way that I'm performing my identity on the applications? Is there something, but no, I'm like in a collared shirt with a smiley face, but I am like a 6'4", 250, 300. Well, I was 250 then, I might be like 300 now, pandemic. And I like a good burrito at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm just a big person. And so I was like, what does it mean for me to perform in relationship to this history of photography, this history of sort of masculinity, Black masculinity too. And then thinking about how I can use that sort of material of history to create some type of collage, in which I'm thinking about my contemporary form in relationship to some like historical precedent in which Black bodies have been seen a certain way. And so this came out right, I think I took these photographs right after the Paper magazine, Kim Kardashian photographs. And there was this dialogue around Kim's race happening, or ethnicity. You know, is Kim white? Because she's Armenian. But like in America, we don't care about ethnicity. We only care about race, which is like fabricated, it is made up, right? And so there was something about me redoing these sort of photographs and also linking them to these other, it's a series that includes Grace Jones images, Sartiji Bartman images, and thinking about my body, my sort of hyper masculine Black body subversively being more feminine and being like used in thinking about massage noir, thinking about histories of photography, who if photography in itself is very white and male, and then like how many Black femme photographers have been, or femme bodies have been used or looked over, and what is my role as like a Black male in this sort of construction of history. So I started constructing these images. But that's a lot of what I was thinking about at the time. And photography for me has a very interesting sort of relationship to my practice, because sometimes I can't photograph. I'll use the mechanisms that I learned to think about in photography, like visibility, or even something that is mechanical or structured, and try to break that down in my sculptural work or in my textile work, or my film work, in the same way that I think about taking photographs. And you know, when my studio mates once said, "Oh, your sculptures are just photographs," and I had to think about that, because I felt like they were different, but they're not in many ways. I'm kind of consumed with the image and how it is produced, and how it functions sort of in our world, and also by force, having to be consumed with my own image, which has like walked down the street and been physically assaulted by the police. You know what I mean? And like navigating what it means to be like a large Black person in the world, and also queer.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely talk about you working in other media later on, but I'm really interested in hearing why photography for the both of you. Why photography as your chosen media in terms of when it comes to representation?
Want to answer first?
Either one. I just spoke for a long time, so
Oh,
I'll let you do that one.
I've always been interested in visuals. When I was younger, I had, no idea I would be a photographer. I just was like, I just want to be an artist. So I was drawing and painting and sculpting and making ceramics, basically objects. And for most of my life until high school, and I took my first photo class, but I was always in arts programs, so I had done many things media-wise, and I just felt this connection to photography. The more I experimented in high school, started out with film, and then that led to digital, and I figured out that I could create, these visual representations of my imagination, inspired by, just what I've seen growing up, what I've watched in the media, reading books. It felt like it was easy to just create my own spaces and put the people that I wanted them in there. So I was making these digital images that were very surreal in high school, and then of course, knowing all of the things that I had liked to do, like drawing and painting and sculpting, when I got to college, I limited myself to those three as majors: painting, sculpting, and photography. And then I really only took a photo class, and basically decided to major in photography in college. I mean, it seemed like the greatest idea resource-wise as well. And yeah, I just thought that I could get like a lot of ideas out of my head quickly through photography. I was still very early at like crafting the language. I still needed to make the work that that language was for, but it was definitely something that I knew it just felt right to make images. I could make a lot of them. Um, it seemed like I never really got tired until I did of making images. But then, you know, there's so many things that I, you know, limited myself to just because I wasn't out, you know, that determined like who I photographed, what I was photographing. What I could tell them were reasons I wanted photographs of, you know, people if, you know, they involved, you know, predominantly um, straight Black men. Or, you know, and then I'm just like, well, I can't, you know, expect anyone to know anything about these people if, you know, they're just presented as people that I've met on the street. Once I started to like go into different neighborhoods and photograph strangers. Um, so yeah, like all of that was kind of like learning along the way of like making images and basically putting the people that I, you know, had more of a connection with into the front of the camera. And myself also into that place because I'm looking at myself, I'm looking at my growth, my changes, what I'm comfortable with doing, what I'm comfortable with showing. Um, so yeah, like all of that has kind of been like a learning experience, kind of a documentation as well, just over the years and kind of like crafting that to be more specific to me as an artist has been like just very expensive because I am now at the point where all of those things that I loved to do growing up, I am, you know, finding ways of including them into my practice as an artist now. And I really don't, like I just love making images, but I also, you know, like am wanting to expand on what images are or can be, um, like in whatever ways that I can. So yeah, like images are everywhere. Like there's you can't escape. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me
Oh.
that you've used photography as some kind of orientation, whether that's towards understanding your familial kinships, but also understanding your own queerness, like thinking of photography as a tool of reality um, that that images the changes between the self and the world. I mean, the one thing that I also thinking about is the way that performance is very interlinked with photography, especially in this image that we're looking at of Derrick posing as Grace Jones. We see a very direct relationship between performance or performance in photography. So Derrick, could you tell us more about this image and its conception and the way that you think about performance and photography?
Absolutely. I also want to speak a little bit to how I came to photography, because it's a lot
Yes,
anyway,
absolutely.
like through performance. I think I was a college athlete and I took photography and film, like just the smell of film. And actually, my professor passed away. And sort of I had the keys to the dark room, and it was like this unregulated sort of safe area where really my relationship to photography was taking photographs of beer bottles and basketballs, right? But I would go down and I was this in the closet athlete who would cruise the halls and bring different men to sort of like hook up with me while I'm in the dark room. So this space later in my life, as I started going to dungeons and other places, that red light sort of had this sort of performative nature of a space that I was familiar with. So like cruising in a dungeon or being in a place of like high sexual like fascination is kind of similar to me handling photographs or exposing them. And I don't know why I'm blanking. Developing them. That's the word I was looking for, developing. And then I sort of like, I got stuck at home. I went home and I started working for a cheesy portrait studio called Portrait Innovations. It was very similar to like a J.C. Penney. And I took all these photographs of children. Like, I mean, I can make any kid like smile, like a 2-year-old. The 3-year-olds you can't do shit about because they just gonna be mean. And I realized I hated it. Like, there was no way that this was the type of photography I wanted to do, but I was so interested in the medium and like that fascination I had when I was in college. And so I applied to grad school and went to Mass Art and was taking these sort of like crazy sadomasochistic photographs of people I'd meet on Craigslist trying to survive a Boston winter naked. I mean, it's like all the truth. It was crazy. And I would take these photographs. And I was just sort of interested in like how like the body performed under a condition, And the condition was that like I met these people almost randomly or anonymously. And then we were in this sort of circumstance in which people would desire to somehow please me, not even sexually, but like my lens or my camera in some type of way. And I was so fascinated by that I'm still interested in how desire operates in relationship to like my body in relationship to other people. And so photography really became a mechanism for me to explore that. And so did sculpture, and so did a lot of other things. But when I'm thinking about how people receive my body, performance just makes a lot of sense too. And so like in this photograph that's in front of us, I'm really considering how the other people, so first of all, the Grace Jones photograph for the Island Life cover never happened. No one can get into this pose. And a few artists have talked about this, but they chop Grace Jones's body up to make her perfect. They slim her, they Photoshop her before Photoshop is a thing. And I was thinking about presentation and people's ability to present you, who also like stands in the way, who also is the ally. So sort of having this Black woman propping me up and holding me, and then this white man in front of me, and then this white woman who actually, the photograph in itself, because they're called documentations of a performance, like all of those things were happening in the room. This is what it required to try to take the photograph. It just so happened that the timer caught this moment that later became a photograph that I used. And I needed to allow things like that into my work so that the camera could sort of perform, or that my work could perform for me. And I didn't have to be beholden to this idea that I took the photograph. I authored the experience. And so that becomes like really big as we get later in my work. This is from 2015. But like in the work that I'm creating now, I'm thinking about like co-authorship and co-performance. But it came from moments like these of finding these photographs in a deck and being like, oh, this experience, this performance of existing together to create this idea is the work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking about the way that Jean-Paul Goude has imaged people like Naomi Campbell and Grace Jones, and how they've taken, the way that he's imaged them is the typical savage role that Black people have occupied in photography, and also just the history of representation.
Yeah, you're talking about that Jungle Fever book, it's off the table book. I don't even think you can get it anymore. But you have like Naomi Campbell in cages.
Yeah, with leopards, like she's running with leopards. Yeah,
like riding on an elephant,
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. And I don't know, like, what else can we say about like white male lenses around other people's bodies except like it's ridiculous? But there is something about being able to author your own photographs that I can think about you thinking about this too, D'Angelo, like to be the author of the experience of the people that are in your orbit or in conversation with you, different than taking a subject and putting them in this sort of idea that you have a fascination and objectification of them. I think there's something different.
Yeah, I mean, I also didn't know that this photograph was an accident, which really speaks to the conditional aspects of photography and being able to capture perhaps what the eye cannot even envision or experience. And so which makes me think about the relationship that you have, the two of you, with being the object and the subject of the photograph, or being the object and the subject of the camera. So I'd love to hear about your different and varying relationships about this subject-object dynamic.
I don't think about objects in my work at all. Like, I mean, I've gotten to a point where I've had conversations about, you know, me is looking like, you know, the things that I'm trying to avoid are the same things that, you know, have been done, you know, that I'm, you know, trying to avoid, but doing the same thing. Like, am I photographing these, you know, these strangers that I've met but had many experiences with any different than, you know, like Maplethorpe or, you know, and I don't think I am. So if I can like think about, you know, who I'm including in the work, knowing that, you know, the spaces will be the spaces that they're in, whether domestic or in the landscape, I'm just like, there are no objects here. Everything is alive. Whether that's the landscape or the space. And then the people in them, you know, those are, I guess, the stars of the space. But I'm not thinking of anything as an object. So even in, you know, everything has a piece of the energy of the life of the image in it, which helps me when I'm like, you know, focusing on what to do, what's being interacted with, if anything. So like this table, for example. Yes, it is a table, but it's literally, you know, tables are used in arm wrestling. It looks weird if it's not a table. It makes it more challenging if there's not something that, you know, helps the action. And it's just a very simple, you know, like act. But also just like made up, like I've never arm wrestled with my father before making this image. But the idea was, I know, like, you know, we don't have or didn't, we have a relationship that's like, you know, it's always been this back and forth of like, you know, wanting to support, my father wanting to like, you know, support the work, being the images, but still like feels the way that he does about me being gay and will, you know, like joke about it or queer or whatever. And I know that that's what that's going to be, but his presence in my work, you know, like I, you know what his body looks like. I know like how I've seen it before over time, over the years, and like wanting to present him this way. Yes, being looked at, but I'm not, you know, thinking that he's or we're being looked at as objects, because it's about more than, you know, like the body. It's about, you know, this relationship between father and, you know, he, I'm sure, still sees me as a son, but like my identity, I've sort of like been more specific about, you know, not identifying as male or female, or, you know, just like, what does it look like, you know, when I'm in this experience with my father in an image that kind of like he thinks is still, you know, what we are to each other, but also what it's felt like for me being in this experience with my father that doesn't really have a visual, but it has all of these actions and experiences between us that like this kind of sums it up, basically. But that, I mean, when you look at any of my images, like they don't really like use props, but like I try to use or have these specific, also kind of like adds more of a comfort to the images. Like these necklaces and bracelets that we're wearing, he and I both showing our tattoos that are very different, but kind of like our own kind of like gift to our body in a way. But also trying to show these sort of moments where it's like, yeah, you're gonna wear, your bracelet and your necklace. I'm gonna put my chain on, things like that. But no, it's even more about that. It's about what we're doing. It's about the history that we have, and is reflective of many people's relationship with their father as queer and Black people that may not necessarily even exist in certain ways or at all. But yeah, like I just can't think about like objects or the word. Like I am running through like my images in my head and I'm like nothing's an object. It's so weird.
Well, I guess I was trying to think about it in terms of how our bodies are perceiving subjects, right? We're always perceiving our environments, our world, but then we're also the perceivable object. To others, we can be perceived as something. That's how I was thinking about the subject-object dynamic.
Yeah. I just can't so like when I think about certain images, I know that there have been images where Black people, queer people have been objectified.
Mhm.
It's been helpful to like overlook like the act or the idea that Black people can be objectified moving forward, because at this point we should know that that's not something that we should be doing. So like I'm not automatically looking for that. And when I experience this sort of idea of like what to do in an image that I've crafted, I'm like, okay, nothing here that I've put into this image is an object. So like it's definitely a challenge for me that I've kind of like gotten myself to think out of.
I think I had to get to a point. We probably identify it differently, D'Angelo, but there's this navigating the onlooker that I think is really central to the way I felt like we learned, or at least I learned photography until graduate school. And if I remove the onlooker and I create the space, then there are no objects because I've just created community, and that's a choice that you have to get to, because I think you have less choices. Like in the learning of photography, I think the choice is like, are you object or are you not object? And then when you like decolonize that, or you just like remove that structure from your life, and you just begin using the camera as a different type of structure for your friends, for your family, for your chosen family members. At least for me, I don't think about objects as much anymore. Like I don't consider objects either. But I think early on I was really concerned with it. And I was concerned of how we were being looked, or how I was being looked at in this sort of photographic way. And then when I started focusing on just like Black queer folks, that changed a lot. And the photographs became ever so more accidental in a way, because the camera could be sitting on a shelf, able to be used, and we're just hanging out, and then it comes out. Or we're on the beach getting stoned and just spending time together, and then we begin documenting each other in like a different way. And I had to get there. I didn't start there. It was like a lot of trauma. It was a lot of trauma is where it began. And I think what healed me was building really positive Black queer relationships with folks.
Which is challenging.
Huh?
So which is challenging.
Which is challenging too. But it gave me a way to see myself and the other people in my photographs with a different type of agency, like completely removed from if we were objects or not. But it took me some time to get there.
Yeah, I love this refusal to this long history of photography, of thinking about the subject-object dynamic, and using photography to really animate our own subjecthood as Black queer folk, which is something that I really appreciate. So Derrick, you too have also you are a filmmaker. You've produced 2 films so far, correct me if I'm wrong. And with Roche is coming, you delve a little bit into your childhood, you delve into your boyhood. Could you tell us about this film?
Yeah, I almost in the same way that like me and what I just said to D'Angelo, like there's like the trauma film, and then there's like the second film is about sort of celebration, right? And so I don't know, I feel like we're not running out of time, but we're getting close. So I don't want to get super deep into it, but I returned home to North Carolina after 20 years, 15, 20 years, and reconnect with an adult who was a young boy on a playground when I was 5, who was lover, boyfriend, friend. We didn't need the language, but we were intimate. And this person grew up to be a police officer. And I had just been pretty much held at gunpoint for having a headlight out in a back alley in Chicago 3 days before Philando Castile was murdered. And I didn't know how to feel about that. and I had been given this assignment for this sort of photo essay, and they gave me the cop. And I thought it was also like post Mike Brown. So I thought it was sort of a fool's errand. It was also a queer publication. We're great friends at this point, but that made me feel like I needed to sexualize the cop in some type of way, and I couldn't do that. And I didn't know if I could humanize the cop either. So I reached out to this person, and I wanted to just have a dialogue. And it leads to this dialogue that happens while I bathe him in a bathtub. And so it's sort of this interrogative film in which I'm bathing this police officer in a bathtub, and you never see that. That is the voiceover for this sort of metaphor in which these sort of 2 twin boys are performing play like me and Adam did as children. And in that sort of play, I'm really interested in the performance of race, like whiteness performing for me. And that's pushed out and sussed out in many different ways as tropes in the way that it's filmed. The level, the eye level, the splitting of cutting in the film is centered around this idea. But I had just read Claudia Rankine's Citizen, and I was just thinking about white performativity. We always talk about people of color, but we never talk about people of non-color, right? Or like that structuring makes people of color the object again, right? And so I wanted to play with that. And so I developed, it was hard. I developed a film in a set of photographs, some really, really intimate Polaroids, and these all happened with the police officer. We don't speak anymore. And I'm okay with that. But I needed to make the work to get to a point where I could make the second film, which is really about Black cruising in the histories that go along with it. And in that film, I'd seen Moonlight, and I moved into wanting to like see the celebration of Black sex, because I felt like Moonlight left that out too. There was some nuance, and there was some sleights of hand that may have meant more, but I thought we owed it to the audience to see Black people engage in sexual activity. But it's mainstream, so it's not going to happen. And so I wanted to make something that actually included a scene in which there was physical intimacy between Black folks. And so that's the second film.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how ablution works in this film. Why wash this former lover, this former childhood friend, who's now a cop?
Why wash him? It's interesting because I think the last time I had been bathed, I was really young, and it was my mother, right? And it didn't feel sexual, but the cop is queer. And so there was this sort of question of like bathing him in a bathtub, and we were once boyfriends, but what does that mean when you're 5, you know? What would it mean to reconnect in some intimate way? And then to conflate this once really intimate feeling of being bathed as a child and this intimate connection I had with this person to where we were as adults. It seemed like energy. It seemed like a place to create something. I didn't really know what was going to happen. The idea is that we would spend 72 hours together and whatever came of it would be the work I produced for this publication. But it became a film, and it became photographs, and it became sculptures where I compacted police cars and hung them from cranes. You know, it became a lot of different things. But I think this gets into that I'm looking to create a space, and then whatever comes as a product of that is really the fall off. Like really the artwork is the experience, and then like things fall off of that experience and they hang in places or they go other places. But that's why it seemed like an energy field that I could be a part of, and it would develop something.
And this is an installation that was related to the previous work, right?
Mm-hmm. This is you know, when I compacted the cop car, the police car that was sort of given to me by the city of Chicago. This organization that sells a lot of police cars to the police, to cops, couldn't give it to me, so they sold it to me for $1. And then I took it out to West Chicago and I got it compacted, but I took the chairs out. I took the tires off. I took the doors off. And I turned all of those things into sculptural objects or installation objects.
Another thing I'd love to discuss too is working with the outdoors, imagining Black social life in the outdoors. This is something that you discussed earlier, D'Angelo, in speaking about how you use props in the outdoors in challenging ways, allowing for the outdoors to be your studio. Could you speak about, you know, working in the landscape, because you're both from the South? So I also wonder how growing up in the South has influenced your practices with landscape.
Yeah, I have definitely grown to love the landscape more than I thought I did or would. And see it as a live part of my images as well now. And that was like a very recent thought or idea, but it helps to think that way because like any part of it can become a part of the image, and or like my interaction with the people involved, interactions with the space. I feel become more spiritual and more connected to our ancestors who may or may have not, you know, been on that same land or in those same spaces. Yeah, just depending on where. But I have definitely, more so the challenges have been what to do in the landscape. Like I can make images anywhere. I don't always have to be interacting with the landscape, but when I am, I'm wanting to, you know, make it a part of, you know, like the body, like an extension of the bodies in the images, the people in the images, and what we're doing. So, for example, here, this image was taken in Los Angeles in a park, Elysian Park. I titled it after the park. But I also just, you know, like Googled the definition Elysian, and it was related to this sort of paradise or the idea of it. Um, and it was around the time that I was starting to think about, not necessarily, I hadn't been wanting to like make my sort of own utopic, like images or spaces, because I want the images to look like, they are a part of this world. Just I want the conversation to be about uncharted territory for Black and queer people. Like, where can we be seen? Where can we be, hidden and like as visible as we want to be? And I thought about, once I was in this particular space, there was this wall of dead palm leaves, and I was like, I want to get under it and make this image of someone being pulled into it, or looking like there's this in between space of like you see one person here, but you can't really see like what they're being pulled into. There are other places to go, basically, beyond what we see. And I think about like, being in a space like that. And then, yes, of course, like, kind of interacting with other people, whether, it's someone you've been intimate with or someone who's family. It's going to look different ways. So I was, wanting to connect on more specifically, like these desires of love and wanting that, and then also, like what does like how many, like all the ways that like touch can look. Like everything has like a definition that gets so specific and particular to the actual thing that it looks like. Like, yes, our hands are where they are, which suggests one thing, or many, many things that revolve around love or sex or intimacy. But it's also like when you've looked at the history of how we've been able to be seen as Black and queer people, it doesn't always look like this. And it's yeah, so like in that, in creating this image, so thinking about space and how to use it, but also like giving this sort of energy to the figures involved, or the sort of life that can be experienced, just based on what you're saying in different ways.
I'll respond. The photograph. Also, first, that was beautiful, D'Angelo. So that was beautiful. The photograph to the right is of you, Denny. It comes from like a sort of body of work or way of working with the land. And I go to this beach in New Orleans a lot called Lincoln Beach. It was a beach built for Black people in a way. They built like the community raised $1 million and built an entire facility. And that's because of a lot of racist shit that happened, right? And so the land for me becomes this sort of material, oftentimes related to like what's movable or what can be, like excavated more metaphorically, but in relationship to how land has been used and cut up. And so when I put Black bodies on land, I'm thinking about how they travel along it, how the body moves in relationship to the land that's behind it. And there is something here about energy in places where Black people have been before that comes in the same way, maybe with D'Angelo's work as well. I really love hands. I'm reading The Motion of Light and Water by Samuel Delany. He fetishizes hands. And I think that's why I keep reading it. For the next moment, he fetishizes hands. And so I keep looking at the hands in your photograph, D'Angelo, but I also like the hands in this photograph of you, Denny, are kind of just great for me. Yeah. And the wrist it sort of snaps, but it's in like motion. It's just sort of like prolonged queerness that's floating across the screen, just like for a moment, and it ends. And it just was one of a few photographs we took in a space in which we dialogued and we moved together. And this came to me and I saw it and I was like, this is it, you know? There's something here also about the types of forms and the blur in the photographs. That's really important. I talked about movement, but the face becomes really important too, because I nullify it a lot in my work. Because I think the face locates us somewhere and I want to locate us elsewhere. And so in a lot of the photographs I take, you'll see the face blurred as a way of thinking about relocating us in the body a different way. And I guess you're talking about touch, and I think I'm thinking about seeing, like how we see Blackness personified, how we see Blackness as a metaphor. What can Blackness be in its mobility or in its rest? Because I'm oftentimes not trying to link it to labor. Like labor is always there, but like I think when you're in your community and you're making work, like it isn't work. There's this James Baldwin quote, and I think someone asked James, like, what's your dream job? And he says, I do not dream of labor. You know, because if it's passion, it's something different. And so it's just like beautiful to be able to make a moment like this with someone.
Yeah, and this was our second time working together, I believe, because first we worked on a project for a magazine, I believe. I think it was called Positive Magazine. And I loved working with you, Derrick. That was such an amazing experience. Whenever I go to Horner Park, I always just think about you and the moments that we spent there that summer. I mean, it also makes me think a lot about the ways that the subjects in your photographs, both you and D'Angelo, co-author the photograph. They co-author the narrative that's happening in the photograph. Even as we're speaking about the tactility that's happening in D'Angelo's photograph, it makes me think about what did the other subject choose to say or choose to do? When was the right moment? When did they feel that this was the right moment, right? But also in this moment too, I feel like working with you, Derrick, I think I felt that we just kind of had to work with chance in a lot of ways. We also had to work with trusting each other when it comes to aesthetic choices. But there's also another moment, like I remember in the park when we went by the riverbed, and we came across a group of people or these two couples that were on a date, and we asked them to hold up a fabric piece for us. And it makes me think a lot about the ways that working with friends to image these uncharted territories that D'Angelo is speaking of, where Blackness performs desire and the phantasmic, is really generative in so many different ways, like in the ways that you're thinking about the blur in the moment, the way that this non-legibility of the face or of the subject in itself embodies Blackness, embodies movement in Blackness. And I think we're almost out of time. So I think we should perhaps screen your work. Yeah. Okay.
We can. If you want to look at D'Angelo's work, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing about working with friends. This is something that I was gonna allow D'Angelo to talk about, is the way that he's worked with artists and friends. Yeah, D'Angelo, could you speak to these images?
Yeah. I have been more inclusive of people who are closer to me. When I was in grad school, I started out just photographing myself after trying to photograph strangers in the neighborhoods and streets of Syracuse. And I didn't feel any connection to it, just doing it right off the bat. But I started to perform for myself. And then, of course, I was having my first experiences, not necessarily dating, but having hookups and like letting people into my life that I was also figuring out as this Black queer person. And seeing how challenging that was. And when things started to work, like just visually, it would be, you know, like from the experiences that I would have. And then of course I talked about once including other people in the images, like what they're comfortable with doing. So when I, you know, had my first relationship, which was with the artist Dietrich Brackens, who's in this image, Burn One. It was like, you know, okay, this is different. I'm connected to this person differently. Um, I mean, although still like early, it's like, how do I, you know, include and photograph? Like, how am I looking at the person, one, that I'm photographing? Like, how do I see them? How do I see myself with them? How do I see myself? And like all of that looks like different things, but I've tried to like, you know, how does it all interact was what I was thinking. And I was like, okay, when I'm thinking of looking at Black people in my images, I'm wanting there to be this sort of discovery of ourselves, discovery of things that we just haven't seen, or the things that we have, you know, avoided acknowledging. So I think about it more of as I think about it more as a science. Like we're scientists basically, and like we are revealing these scientific findings that are just so simple, you know, or they're like, you know, so mundane. But like the people in the images, whether they're friends or someone I've had sex with, or someone who's just, you know, like wanted to be in the images after seeing them before, like all of those interactions kind of like become like the community that is being built. And like, you know, photographing people over a period of years is something that's happened. So like there is always some sort of connection that kind of guides the images, or how I'm wanting to, you know, be photographed with someone that I've been involved with romantically, or someone who's just a friend, but like a really good friend. This image, Love Train, is with Jarvis Boylan, who's in front of me, and Cameron Claiborne, who's behind me, is taking that Skowhegan. And we were kind of like the Black queer people who hung out, not like all the time. Like I was definitely wanting to make images with all of the Black people and Black and queer people there, because that's who was involved in my work. So like what I had us do was very specific to kind of like that history. Here I wanted to have us performing as this non-existent Black queer music group, kind of in the same vein as Destiny's Child, but also like having it not look like a specific time, showing that, you know, this is something that could have existed, you know, way before my time and our time, but just hasn't, and we pretty much know those reasons. But like we have an idea here, but also it's sort of just with the hands, it's sort of about this kind of control of, you know, like perfection, and how no matter how we look, like the, you know, or I mean, yeah, because it was about looks, it was about, you know, identity, as to reasons why you may or may not have been successful at, you know, getting something like a Black queer group, you know, started at any point in history. But it's like, even if something doesn't exist or hasn't existed historically, it doesn't mean that it can't, you know, still be pretend and like still have the same effect of, you know, garnering a conversation about what it could look like. How do we interact as, you know, Black queer people, even if it's like creating our own music life, just like for the sake of entertainment and joy, you know. But also like just the performance of it all just speaks to like how we've existed throughout time, you know, in whatever space.
I love love the relationship that you have. I wish we had time to discuss your more photojournalistic work. I don't know what else to call it. How would you define this work, D'Angelo?
I would say it's editorial work.
Okay, editorial. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's more appropriate. Yeah, more than photojournalistic.
Yeah, I would
Um,
consider myself that.
yeah. Um, we'll show whoops. We'll show Derrick's work and then we'll open it up to a Q&A.
Has created a generation that would never replicate the things that we did.
Yeah.
The people just don't interact. They depend on something to stand in between the two people.
To mediate
Yeah.
the space.
Yeah. Unconsciously not recognizing, seeing, or we're looking at it and condemning.
I just wanted to say briefly that moment in the film, because it's about 11, I think it's only 8 minutes long, is a moment where Patrick is actually talking about, I'm not the author of that film. The film also really, the subject matter is about the AIDS crisis. And like it was something that I could not speak for, although we are still in the AIDS crisis. I did not live through the height of it. So someone who's a community member was telling their story. And we were dialoguing through the film about cruising then and cruising now and its relationship to like Grindr or the apps that we use, Growler, Jacked. And so there was something that Patrick was saying about how it's mediated different, like that relationship to the body, cruising, and the interaction between bodies happening in real public space was different. And that sort of was what the dialogue was about. And the last caveat would be that I was really fortunate to screen the film in the Jacked app. And so in a more like democratic way, that sort of application is used by like 3 million, I think it's 3 to 5 million people between the US and Canada. And so whereas people could not access something like this in a gallery, or it was shown in a gallery for 100, but I don't know that at one moment I got to see that 15,000 people were watching this film at the same time, the people who the history it was telling. Jacked is also an app geared traditionally to Black and brown folks. So it just seemed like that's a different way of thinking about an exhibition space. It felt right. And I'd like to do more things like that in the future.
Yeah, that was such a successful way of showing this film because you showed this right before or during the pandemic on Jacked, right? And I remember going on Jacked and watching this. And it was such an amazing experience to be like, wow, Derrick's work is showing outside of a gallery space and it's speaking to these histories that have framed our experiences today.